Arnstein, the Viennese banker, took Rachel's eldest son, Abraham, with him to Vienna and had him trained as a land surveyor. On his days off, Abraham would walk to Kupcin to share food he had saved with his mother and siblings. Abraham pursued his studies in land surveying, and things were beginning to look up for the troubled Politzer family when disaster struck again. Emperor Francis I issued a decree banning Jews from pursuing land surveying studies. Desperate, Abraham Politzer did not know what to do next. His benefactor Arnstein had just died too. The future looked bleak. He went to Hungary on foot. He arrived in Pest with an empty pocket and stomach, and learnt that the Jewish community in Pécel was hiring a teacher. He hurried there and got the job. He was offered a bed by the Shaliach Tzibur and boarded with another Jewish family. On days when the teacher ate with them, they always had the cheapest food, beans. This was how the young man, grown up in a distinguished family, spent the years of his youth. Letters from his mother and siblings did little to improve his mood. His mother complained about hardships, money fell to a fifth of its value, which in turn brought on immense poverty. In the meantime, his uncle, Wolf Politzer, was actively trading in South Hungary, Transylvania and Slavonia. During his business travels, he often met a merchant called Jakob Hai. A relationship of trust developed, and so as not to be each other's rivals, they partnered up. The volume of business grew, and they soon needed to hire someone to deal with the correspondence and the accounting. Wolf Politzer then remembered he had a nephew studying in Vienna. There was a fair in Pest, visited by many merchants, and someone there knew Aber Politzer, the Pécel teacher. Wolf sent him a message telling him to call him at his lodgings in Országút in Pest. This marked a turning point in Abraham's life. Wolf Politzer and Jakob Hai were having lunch when a pale, thin, barefooted young man came in, introducing himself as Aber Politzer. They quickly ordered him a meal, which the emaciated teacher devoured. After lunch, Wolf dressed him from tip to toe, transforming him into a handsome, slim young man. Aber Politzer could write almost as fast as he spoke. He wrote with facility and elegance, and his handwriting was polished. Jakob Hai's elder daughter, Golda, grew very fond of him, and the two gradually fell in love with each other. Jakob Hai's practical instincts and smartness told him that knowledge and diligent work were worth more than money, so he gladly married his daughter Golda to the poor teacher. His calculation was correct, and he would never regret his decision. After they got married, Golda and Aber opened a small, tastefully furnished store in Ilsha on the Great Plain. Their immense diligence earned them a modest living. Golda managed the household and Aber went on business trips. Their first child, Moritz, was born in 1825, followed by Illés, Ignác, Lenny, Rudolf, Bernard, Adam, Farkas, Fülöp, Sámi, Rosi, Zsoli, Zsigmond and Gustav. By the time the youngest was born, the eldest had got married, so poor Golda would never see all 14 of her children together. The 10 boys once gave their mother a gift of a joint picture. As the Politzers were quietly living the life of average Hungarian country Jews, the world turned in such a way that it was visible even from Irsha. More and more old restrictions were being abolished. The papers wrote about the emancipation and Hungarianization of the Jews, and from 1847 onwards, Irsha and the capital were connected by a railway line. Some of the battles of the 1848 revolution were quite literally fought on their doorstep, which would have a profound effect on their children's lives. Aber could not live to see those changes, as he died at just 57 in 1854. By the time Abraham Politzer's children grew up, the world had vastly changed. Zsigmond was just a little boy buzzing around Illés, who was telling stories of the revolution. When he prayed for the first time like a grown-up as a bar mitzvah boy donning his tefillin, his father Abraham was no longer alive, and Golda was forced to take care of the family. She sent her son to a grammar school in Pest, but Zsigmond was a dreamy, lazy pupil and dropped out of school after a while. At the time, in the détente following the horrific years after the War of Independence, Francis Joseph issued dozens of orders that ended the restrictions affecting Jews, meaning that Jews were allowed to acquire property across the entire empire. They could work in industry and hire Christian workers. These laws paved the way to the Jews becoming the founders of Hungarian industrialization and Budapest becoming a world leader in the milling industry. Zsigmond seized these opportunities, and having given up his studies, he got a job instead, working as a wool purchaser for his brothers in their family business. Later on, his entrepreneurial spirit led him to found businesses previously unheard of in feudal Hungary. Together with his peers, he would become part of a process that created Budapest by uniting 3 towns, Pest, Buda and Óbuda, in 1873, making it a modern metropolis. Municipal leaders marked the unification with the construction of a new modern avenue, Andrássy út. Zsigmond had a keen sense for the vibes of the age and the needs of the growing capital city. He started by buying up raw materials such as wool and oats, like so many who regarded Hungary as the larder of the monarchy. But rather than processing these and placing them on the market, he launched a completely new business in lottery tickets. He began by selling Rothschild lottery tickets, and when business was booming, he established a bank and published a betting magazine. Bills of exchange and lottery tickets were a lucrative business. Building him a fortune, he invested in erecting apartment houses. In those years, Budapest's population almost tripled, and the Municipal Public Works Council, the capital city's urban planning body, decided to build a boulevard along what was once a branch of the Danube. This would connect and organise the old inner city and the suburbs. The boulevard intersected Andrássy út at Oktogon. Zsigmond and his brother Gustav were quick to snap up land on the boulevard, Teréz körút. In addition to the houses on the boulevard, Zsigmond built many houses in Váci utca, Dohány utca and István utca. The other important challenge of the era, alongside huge construction projects, was the increased mobility of the modern way of life. Zsigmond was keenly aware of this, and in addition to being on the supervisory board of the Hungarian Railways, he was co-founder of the Hungarian Automobile Association at a time when there were hardly any cars in the country. Zsigmond Politzer was a true child of the Gründerzeit. He was a step ahead of his contemporaries and boldly embarked on new ventures. Apart from making a fortune for himself and his family, he contributed to Budapest becoming a modern metropolis. He was a man of traditional family values, although he had fewer children than it had been customary in earlier generations. He married Irma, daughter of the Politzer family in Mokó, and thus became related to the American press magnate Joseph Politzer. His children were raised in the emancipated Pest Jewish bourgeois spirit, keeping Jewish customs at home, but in social life following a bourgeois ethos in keeping with their wealth and status. They gave an education to all their 4 sons and only daughter Margit, who also learnt to play the piano. She was extremely gifted, but her parents could not reconcile treading the boards with the idea of being a well-bred young lady. She was not the rebellious type, unlike her brother Simon, who not only changed his name to Kornél Török, but left his ancestors' religion, became a Catholic, and moved to Brussels, where he served as honorary consul to Hungary during the Horthy era. He was co-organizer of the ambitious project of taking to Belgium and Holland tens of thousands of poor Hungarian children arriving in Hungary as refugees from areas detached from Hungary by the Treaty of Trianon, to nourish them and help them regain strength. Born before the revolution that brought bourgeois transformation, actively contributing to the modernization of Hungary, Zsigmond would not live to see this. He died in 1919 at the age of 77. Zsigmond showed brotherly adoration for Adam, 6 years older than him, of whom he always spoke in the highest terms. Adam elected a career in medicine like his grandfather, the Köpcsény doctor Moise Bader, and his brother Illés. In a quickly moving world, he acquired knowledge his medical relatives could not have known. When in the 1850s Adam went to university in Vienna, there was a scientific revolution underway and a renewal of the medical profession. Thanks to scientific and technical development, the modern microscope and laboratory processes, he accumulated previously unheard of anatomical and histological knowledge. The medical profession branched out, and Adam chose to become an ear specialist. He trained in the most developed laboratories of the era in Würzburg, Heidelberg, Paris and London. When in 1861 he returned to Vienna, he was the first professor in otology, the branch of medicine studying the ear, with just 4 students. From his university chair emerged the first ear clinic in the world, with just 20 beds. The demand was evidently greater. They examined close to 15,000 outpatients a year. Ear patients received increasingly better care thanks to the research and studies by Politzer and his growing number of students, who gained more and more knowledge about the inner structure and histology of the ear and potential cures. One of these included Politzerization, a medical procedure that involves inflating the middle ear by blowing in air with the help of a rubber balloon created by Politzer. Doctors and students flocked to him from every corner of the globe, more than 7,000 people, whom Politzer received with the greatest warmth. Thanks to his language skills, he could teach in German, English, French, Italian, Spanish and Hungarian. One of his most famous students was Robert Bárány, who received the Nobel Prize in 1914 for his medical research. In 1878, Adam Politzer published the first textbook in otology for his students and the newly founded branch of medicine, for which he himself created the illustrations, a series of anatomical drawings. He described several ear diseases and their possible treatments, and developed medical devices published in numerous scientific articles. He still found the time to treat his patients every day from 1:30. His patients included countless artists, many of whom gave their works as gifts to the artistic doctor with brilliant drawing skills. His home on Gonzagastrasse, which he shared with his wife Julia Rosenfelder, and their only child Alice, was a veritable art gallery with 140 works of art on display, including works by Ribera, Rubens, Bronzino, Ingomar, Dürer and Klimt. He and the Viennese painter Ernst Klimt were so close friends that the artist created not only a portrait of Adam, but also an anatomical drawing of the ear. His collection not only served to decorate the interior of the professor's bourgeois home, but also contributed to nascent scholarly art historical research. Adam Politzer supported the newly founded Jewish museums. He gifted works to the Viennese Museum and a biblical-themed copper engraving to the Budapest Jewish Museum after it was founded in 1910. Dr. Politzer not only treated the Viennese elite, but perhaps in vain of the values he had inherited from his grandfather, he also saw patients in a Viennese hospital for the poor and a home for the elderly. He was in high demand, as rapid industrialization and urbanization came with noise pollution unheard of before, possibly leading to the development of several types of ear disease. In addition to his medical and scientific organizational activities, Adam Politzer did a lot to make the branch of medicine he founded known and accepted. He lived in an interesting age when, in spite of the most progressive ideas, the strictest social norms were in place. The creations of human culture, artistic, scientific and technical achievements were admired at world fairs, and the World's Fair, held in Philadelphia, presented Adam Politzer's anatomical collection of healthy and diseased bones of the ear. In honor of his scientific and organizational activities, the ruler, Francis Joseph, appointed him as Privy Councillor in 1902. That was considered to be a major distinction in those times, which came with being addressed as Your Excellency, a higher salary, and the right to enter the court. It was a distinction Adam Politzer had won with his talent and diligence, which he could never have dreamt of in his modest youth. The lost First World War and the disintegration of the monarchy had washed all of that away when at 85 Adam Politzer died in 1920. His grave is in the Viennese Jewish cemetery, his books and anatomical models in the Viennese University and in museums. There is a plaque on the wall of his birthplace, and a bust in the centre of the village preserves his memory. Otherwise only men have histories. Famous women are as rare as bald women. As a matter of fact, respectable women do not have a history. They are born, marry, help their husbands, raise children and die, wrote the editor Adolf Agay, faithfully portraying the Jewish world of the time. The girls married, linking the fate of the Politzers to other families. Forced to flee Politz, Azik had some 300 descendants living in Hungary. Some of them and their stories were passed down in family memory, while others for some reason were overlooked, only to become the protagonists of other family memories. Zsigmond, who kept note of the family history, had an aunt called Rosa. Rosa was wedded to a Debrecen merchant, and their marriage was a very unfortunate affair. The husband was a debauched, insignificant man who soon squandered their fortune and died 2 years after they separated. Rosa moved home, took care of her elderly mother, and died childless. Zsigmond had another aunt, Leni, who married one Leopold Klein in Kecskemét. This too was a bad choice. Her husband was a dull man who became a religious zealot. Although they had 12 children, Zsigmond conveniently committed them to oblivion. No doubt they went on to become the loved and respected ancestors of someone, but those are the stories of different families. Jews living in Hungary were emancipated in 1867 in respect of civic and political rights. They were able to participate in everyday life on the same legal terms as the non-Jewish majority, and join in the creation of modern Hungary, as did the men of the Politzer family. It was to them that these laws applied. It was they who voted in the elections, founded factories and banks, could go to university and become learned doctors and respectable lawyers. Not yet the girls. Social expectations of the girls were different. Illés's eldest daughter, Berta, married Anton Hermann. She was one of the brightest and most exceptional women in both mind and heart. She wrote wonderful short stories, but later came under family pressure to give up writing. In the same way, Zsigmond's daughter, Margit, would not play the piano, even though Béla Bartók had declared her a great talent. Artistic show and treading the boards could not be reconciled with the idea of being a well-bred young lady. Ignác Misner's daughter Lili did enroll at university, after a few faculties began admitting women in 1895, but was forced to drop out after she married. Contemporary public opinion may have regarded Jewish women as symbols of modernity, university-educated consumers of new artistic trends, quick to take up new fashions, but individual circumstances frequently painted a very different picture. Nevertheless, gradually female emancipation too made itself felt, and before long, the horizons of the Politzer girls expanded. One of Illés's daughter, Riza, married the Nagybánya industrialist Béla Bedő. Their son, Rudolf, carried on in Adam's footsteps in collecting art, purchased paintings from the Nagybánya artist colony and other contemporary works, making him one of the most prominent art collectors in Hungary. One of Ignác Misner's daughter, Margit, married her second cousin, Gyula Politzer. Gyula was the trustee of the family dowry fund which their grandfather, Jakob Hai, had founded, with a view to providing the girls of the family with a dowry. Margit worked in a hospital as a Red Cross nurse for 3 years in the Great War, until illness forced her to give up the job she did for charity. Ignac's eldest daughter, Lili, a stunning beauty, married into the Virány family. Her husband Alfred's family had made its fortune in developing transport in Budapest. In the 1890s, they operated the boats called propellers that ferried people across the Danube, and was the only means of transport between Buda and Pest apart from Chain Bridge. One of her husband's brothers, Egon Virány, published his ideas of a United States of Europe. Lili's husband, Alfred, was a chemical engineer managing his own chemical plant. He was an avid sportsman who was into skiing and rowing. Chiefly, however, he played bridge, which he had become fond of as a student visiting America. He developed severe neurosis supposedly after a horse riding accident, which caused the family to suffer a lot. The marriage was not a happy one, and Lili and their son Gabor were frequently subjected to the rage of a violent father. Lili's younger sister Buzi married the lawyer Sándor Ambrus. He had been born from his mother's second marriage as Sámuel Gluck, and later Magyarized his name to Ambrus. Through his mother, he was half-brother of Elvira Mihelfi, the Nagyvárad poet. After graduating from university, Sándor Ambrus became a military judge on the Albanian front, and was even called up to serve in the Hungarian Red Army in 1919. He later inherited his deceased father-in-law's practice and became prosecutor at Kőbánya Bank. Ignác Misner, Sándor and Buzi Ambrus, as well as Alfred and Lili Virány and their children, all lived in the apartment house that Ignác had built on Terézkörút in 1887. Living with them as part of their household were maids, cooks and nannies, which was part of a bourgeois way of life. The story would have included a few secret lovers as well, but that will forever remain their secret, as will the fate of scores of unknown aunties, cousins and forgotten relatives. Ignác Misner, Sándor and Buzi Ambrus, as well as Alfred and Lili Virány and their children, all lived in the apartment house that Ignác had built on Terézkörút. The Viránys would have dinner before 8, because on the hour they listened to the German language news of the BBC. Growing up with Fräuleins fluent in German, the middle-class Jewish family had no difficulty understanding the news in German, which they preferred to the news in Hungarian. In the evening broadcast on the 17th of December 1942, they listened to British Foreign Secretary Eden reporting on the concentration camps and the mass annihilation of Polish Jews. They couldn't have learnt about this from the Hungarian media, nor even the Hungarian service of the BBC, which generally neglected the situation of the Jews, on advice from British intelligence not to appear overly pro-Jewish, for fear that the anti-Semitic Hungarian population would not support the Allied forces. Anti-Semitism assumed an important role in the fundamental ideology of Miklós Horthy's system, which had been created on the ruins of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Hungary suffered one of the most traumatic blows in its history. Dismembering the monarchy, the Treaty of Trianon annexed 2/3 of the country, together with millions of Hungarians, to the successor states. Society unequivocally condemned this and considered it to be a tragedy, sentiments increasingly exploited by state propaganda, which essentially held the Hungarian jury to be collectively guilty. Seeking a revision of the Treaty of Trianon, Hungarian foreign policy in the 1930s increasingly rubbed shoulders with Nazi Germany. In domestic policy, extreme anti-Jewish voices, parties and movements were growing louder. In the late 1930s, anti-Jewish laws were enacted one after the other, causing tens of thousands to lose their livelihood. Ignaz and István Misner and Sándor Ambrus too were expelled from the Bar Association. The Jewish laws in place, the Hungarian Jewry also suffered the loss of tens of thousands of people. In 1941, the Home Affairs authorities deported some 20,000 Jews to Kamianets-Podilsky in the occupied areas of the former Soviet Union. In the meantime, in the Misner's home on Teres Boulevard, the family sought to maintain a semblance of normal life. Ignaz's daughter, Margit, 68 at the time, held the family together. Her father was unable to comprehend what was going on around him. The Jewish laws had expelled him from the Bar Association, stripped him of his lands in the Transdanubia, and even forced him to give the family tableware and his golden pocket watch to the Hungarian National Bank. His great-grandson, Gyula, graduated top marks from grammar school in 1943, wanted to study medicine, but under the laws he stood little chance as a Jew. Finally, thanks to Margit's remarkable social network, he was able to start university in September. However, the next spring semester was interrupted when in March the Wehrmacht occupied Hungary. This in turn led to the introduction of even more drastic measures. In April, Sándor Ambrus, together with many other Budapest lawyers, journalists and public figures, was arrested by the Gestapo and deported to Horthy-liget. They were driven to Dachau on foot, where Sándor Ambrus perished. By then, those at home couldn't even listen to the radio, because the Jews' radios had been confiscated. Lili's husband Alfred himself handed in the world receiver they had bought 4 years earlier. The bicycle that had been Gyula's graduation gift, as well as the automobile, had to be turned in. On Easter Monday, Lili and Alfred went to the funeral of a distant converted relative. Going outside, it was the first time they had to wear on their coats the yellow Star of David marking Jews. In May, Gyula too was called up for labour service. Working in the Buk Mountains under inhumane conditions, he somehow managed to escape in the autumn. A Catholic girl named Clara Boyer, university classmate of his, hid him and his friends in an abandoned factory. By June, Jews from all around the countryside were being deported, mainly to Auschwitz. The only remaining Jews who were in Budapest moved together in houses marked with yellow stars. The flat of the Ambrus was allocated to a detective. Unfailingly believing in the legal order, justice and Governor Horthy, Ignaz Misner wrote a letter requesting that he, the respectable lawyer, and his family be exempt from the Jewish laws. His moving letter fell on deaf ears. In October, the Arrow Cross Party took over power, sealing the fate of Budapest Jews. People desperately sought to obtain protective passes from the embassies of neutral states, or to get into the safe houses of these states. This did not always help. Arrow Cross henchmen would tear up the passes, and more than once they rounded up the residents of a safe house and shot them in the Danube. Margit's sister Gisela and her family too were dragged from a safe house, and the janitor of their own house reported her brother István and had him taken away. Ignaz Misner starved to death in the Pest ghetto. We shall never know how Margit and a few other family members survived. The fate of Jews was often shaped by anonymous helpers and informants, and often miracles. After the liberation, everyone's first thought was to seek out family members. Margit had lost her father, brother, sister, brother-in-law, nephew, and countless other relatives. On the Politzer side of the family, 18 of her relatives perished in the Holocaust. The Misner, Morgenstern, Markbreit, Hai, Österreicher, and others disappeared without trace.
At birth, I was given the name Linda Clara Margaret Livia Ambrus. I don't know why I was given 3 middle names. My 3 older siblings were given just one, My parents changed course with me. The siblings who followed also received 3 middle names. Not sure why. Clara, of course, was after my mother. And I also recall when at age 4 or 5, Grandmother Bougie proudly told me that Livia was for her sister Lily and Margaret was for her mother Margit. I'd never given those names much thought. But like a fairy tale spell that would take hold in some distant, unforeseeable future, I was possessed by the need to know those whose names I had inherited. I was in my 20s when I discovered that I'm not who I thought I was. But it took me this long to muster the courage and determination to embark on a journey of discovery. This story has unfolded over many years, sometimes opening up, sometimes slowing to what seemed a dead end. It was Zygmunt's legacy to finish our family history that he started. And so it's our duty to pick up a quill and continue with the utmost respect where he left off. I respectfully pick it up and search for the truth of my ancestors by bringing their stories back into the light to honor their memory.
We shall never know how Margit and a few other family members survived. Margit lost her father, brother and sister, brother-in-law, nephew, and countless other relatives. Her grandson Gyula finished his medical studies at the University of Szeged and married his saviour, Clara Boyer. They left Hungary in 1947, settled in the United States, where they both became successful doctors and raised 7 children. Margit inherited the real estates of her father, who had starved to death in the ghetto. She paid the inheritance tax and repaired the damages the war had inflicted. But the communist regime declared Margit and many citizens of her fate to be bourgeois capitalists and the enemies of the people. By way of punishment, they were even banned from living in the capital city. Margit and her widowed daughter Bougie were forcefully relocated to the remote village of Narrated. They were given a mere 24 hours to pack their belongings, and anything they left behind was impounded by the state. In the village, they lived under around-the-clock police surveillance. The official rulings on the nationalisation of the Terres Boulevard house and the Schwabhead villa were mailed there. Even the street names had been changed. Terres Boulevard featured as Lenin Boulevard in official documents. Margit and Bougie were only allowed to move back to Budapest in 1953, following the death of Stalin. They were allowed to rent a 2-room flat in the apartment house they once owned. They longed to follow their children away from Hungary into the free world. They were never granted a passport and lived as prisoners of the regime. The 1956 uprising brought freedom. Bougie emigrated, but Margit, who was by then 80 and of ill health, was forced to stay. She complemented her meagre pension by teaching languages until she could. Her other daughter, Lily, took care of her until her death. Bougie went to America and lived with Gyula and his family in Buffalo. They never again discussed the past or the horrors they had lived through, nor the rich family history. They never again mentioned the Jewish roots of the family. Gyula's children never learnt Hungarian and suspected nothing about the history of their family. Bougie played along and said nothing either, not even when Clara Boyer was honoured as Righteous Among the Nations in 2011. The prestigious Israeli award goes to people who rescued Jews under the Holocaust. That much could be known, only they never mentioned to anyone that Gyula too had been hidden by Clara. In the same year, there was a fire in their family home. During restoration, Linda and her sister Madeleine found a mysterious box in the cellar. It was full of letters written in a strange language, Hungarian, birth certificates and photographs. Even then, Gyula didn't come forward. but the Ombruch girls did their research, revealing the family history. Their question about why all of it had been kept a secret from them went unanswered.
I sat next to my father's bed and asked my questions, knowing that silence would be my reply. Why had he kept our ancestors a secret? Even with lesser accomplishments or aspirations, they deserve to be remembered, to be known and respected and admired by us, their family. Why would he deny himself the pleasure of bragging about Rachel and her reputation for being an expert in Latin? He loved languages and was especially proud of his Latin. His passion was medicine and the pursuit of medical research. Why would he not boast about Moritz and Illich and Adam and Alfred, all eminent doctors in their day? Those stories would require no fabrication or exaggeration. And my father embodied many of his family's ideals. I feel blessed to have this extraordinary Jewish history and legacy. It gave me a sense of belonging, like the seeds that my great-great-grandfather Ignaz Misner planted for his beloved trees. I was meant to be. I had roots. I belonged to this earth.